In the last 10 years, the total value of commercial real estate loans held by US banks increased by 109% to $2.9 trillion as of last week. Half of this increase in commercial real estate loans, about $700 billion, turned up in just the last 3 years, which is a bit of a paradox because exactly 3 years ago, COVID arrived and offices became empty. Many workers learned that working from the comfort of your home is a lot nicer than cramming like a sardine into an overcrowded train or sitting in traffic for an hour and a half each way every day. And ever since COVID turned up, company bosses have been struggling to get employees back into the office. We hear rally cries from one CEO after another on social media telling their workers to start turning up because, that is the deal that the workers agreed to when they took on the job that pays them their salary. But the problem is that the job market is hot and employers have little negotiating power. Unemployment is at all-time lows. The number of available jobs is at all-time highs. Incidentally, there are around 10.5 million job openings in the United States at the moment, which is 3 times as many as there were 10 years ago. And so the huge office buildings that were incredibly popular in the city center locations are now standing half empty. Companies with leases are letting their leases run out and downsizing. So how did it happen that about a quarter of the total value of commercial real estate loans sitting on the books of US banks turned up since COVID? Well, there are 3 key factors that have caused this to happen. First, after the financial crash that ravaged the US economy and the US real estate market from 2007 to 2009, the Federal Reserve lowered the rates to sit at just above 0% to stimulate the economy back to life. But after the economy restarted, the Fed was too busy giving speeches, attending gala dinners, they forgot about the interest rate for about a decade. It just sat there at 0%. Then in 2018, Donald Trump appointed Jerome Powell to become the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Jerome Powell remembered that the Fed forgot to actually increase rates back up, even though the economy was doing well. And seeing as the economy was running hot, he thought he'd give it a shot and try a few rate increases. The S&P 500 lost 6% in 2018, but then went on the second biggest bull run in history from 2019 to 2021, growing by 90% in 3 years. Now, usually, when the economy is running that hot, the rates stay high to prevent it from overheating. In fact, rates usually go up. Now, rates went up in the mid-90s to sit at 5 to 6%, and then in the late 90s, the rates stayed at that level and increased a little bit more while the stock market was exploding from 1995 to 1999. But in 2020, COVID arrived and changed everything. Immediately after COVID panic erupted in the US, the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee held an emergency meeting on a Sunday and dropped the rate back down to 0.25%. And at the same time, they printed a load of money and gave it out like free condoms at an HIV clinic. In the 10 years before COVID arrived, the economy had one of the best decades in history, and with the rate sitting at just above 0%, this meant that companies could spend exuberant amounts of money on commercial real estate. Money was flowing, economy was crushing it, and everyone was trying to get that nice office in the middle of London or in Manhattan. This is the age when the likes of WeWork were buying up huge offices every week, chopping them up into small cupboards with glass walls and letting them out to startups with too much seed funding. The offices had free coffee and free beer, and the whole premise of WeWork was that the game of musical chairs would just go on forever, until, of course, the music stopped. Now, in 2020 and in 2021, many of the commercial properties that were bought up during the good times either had to be refinanced or were sold to new owners. The US government was first busy murdering the economy when COVID first turned up by locking everything down, killing every small business that used to exist. But immediately after they went and killed the economy, they realized that perhaps, that wasn't the best move and began trying to resuscitate it by pumping huge amounts of money into the system. The property market that was already booming for 10 years went absolutely bananas. Prices were going through the roof, inflation on property of every type was absolutely nuts, and at the same time, many of the commercial properties acquired during the good years before were up for refinancing. And wouldn't you know it, the rates were at 0%, so loans in commercial real estate were practically free. And so banks were dishing out these loans right, left, and center at near 0% rates. It's also interesting to know that commercial real estate loans didn't increase because there was more commercial real estate. It wasn't the case that in the last 10 years of the economic boom, people built more offices, the economy was expanding and that resulted in more office space being available, because while the value of commercial real estate loans went up 109% in the last 10 years, the price of commercial real estate went up 104%. So almost all of the increase in the loans can be attributed to the increase in the price of real estate per unit instead of increase in the amount of commercial real estate available. The problem with commercial loans is that unlike typical US residential mortgages, they don't get fixed for 30 years. And a few days ago, Scott Reckler, a director at the New York Fed, wrote on Twitter that $1.5 trillion of commercial real estate debt is maturing in the next 3 years. That's about half of all the commercial real estate debt. And those loans will need to be refinanced. The issue is, last week, the Fed increased their rates to 5%, almost exactly 1 year from the date of the first increase, when they were sitting at 0. Because back in 2021, the Fed was too busy eating caviar, drinking champagne with their mates, while inflation was increasing from 1.4% to 7% in the span of just 12 months. Jerome Powell was busy giving speeches on how inflation is transitory, don't you worry about anything, and when everyone found out that in fact inflation did not go away all by itself for the first time in history, rates had to increase very fast. The only times when the rates went up faster was in the 1973 oil crisis and when Paul Volcker had to hike rates after inflation ran away in 1979 and 1980. So the rates have gone up and half of all the real estate loans are up for renewal. Commercial real estate often has a longer amortization period than the term of the loan. The point being that at the end of your term, you then have to refinance and pay the lenders some more of those juicy fees. So often a property can have a 20-year amortization schedule but only have a 5-year term. And to keep the numbers simple, let's say that you're a company and you can get a deal that is, say, 75 basis points above the Fed rate when you're borrowing money, excluding all the other fees and costs. For every $1 million or pounds or whatever, your monthly repayment is $3,769. But if you go and whack the interest rate up to 75 basis points above 5%, those repayments increase to $6,291, which is 67% more. So although the rates only increased 5%, it's the relative increase from 0 that is really causing the pain. The situation would absolutely not be the same if we were going just from 5% to 10%, which is the sort of situation that we saw before. And this makes it a ticking time bomb for when those renewals come up that could have very serious repercussions. Last week, Jerome Powell was basically dismissing questions on the impacts of the completely unnecessary 25 basis point hike, just like he was dismissing questions about managing inflation in October 2021. But the size of the US commercial debt pile is about 10% of the entire combined valuation of the S&P 500. According to FDIC, US banks had a combined $620 billion in unrealized losses on their books as of the end of 2022 because of the increases in rates, and research published last week puts that number now at more like $1.7 trillion. And this problem has already collapsed 3 US banks, forced an emergency response from the Treasury, and the Fed has had to print hundreds of billions of dollars to recapitalize the system to prevent banks from going under in the future. And reportedly, the real estate coming up for refinancing is about equivalent in value to the size of this problem we've just had, about $1.5 trillion. A lot of real estate debt, as much as 80% according to Scott Reckler, is held by regional banks, which just happen to be the banks that are already carrying those unrealized losses and collapsing. And the problem is that the situation is a bit like a train heading straight for a brick wall without anywhere near enough time to stop. There are only 6 more meetings of the FOMC scheduled for the rest of this year, 2 in each of the remaining quarters. And the Fed has now backed itself into a corner where they have been so busy telling everyone that they have to keep increasing rates. There's absolutely no other path. There's no other option available. And at the meeting last week, just a few days ago, 17 out of the 18 members of that committee thought that they would have to increase rates higher. And just like politics stopped the Fed from doing the right thing back in 2021, it is now stopping them from doing the right thing in 2023. You can't just do a U-turn and tell the whole world that you fucked up real bad and just do the opposite of what you were saying last time a few days ago. So because of this degenerate bureaucracy, these dipshits would rather save face and be slow to act, do the wrong thing, than take the appropriate action based on data and analysis. That's the kind of world we live in. And even if they do start lowering rates at some point later this year, Because of this situation, it may well be very slow and gradual to show everyone, how considered and measured they are in making their dumbass maneuvers. So the overwhelming likelihood as it stands is that all of this commercial real estate is going to be rolling into refinancing to an environment where interest rates are 20 times higher than they were this time last year. And the banks can't just go and, allow them to roll at the same rate because the banks have cost of funds that is now 20 times higher than it was the same time last year. When you look over time, a rate of 5% in terms of rates is actually perfectly normal. In fact, it is the 0% rates that we've had more recently in the last 13 years. Those are abnormal. But the problem we have is because we have had those rates, we are now in a situation of conditional probability. The problem here is the relative shock of going from 0 to 5% quickly is what's causing the problem, not the absolute level of 5% itself. And it's highly frustrating that the Fed is continuing to increase rates based on their political ambitions, despite there not being any good reason for them to continue to do so. The only two reasons that they're allowed to increase rates in managing the economy is to ensure that employment remains strong, which it is, and to ensure that inflation continues falling down, which it is. You can't go and make inflation 2% from it being 9% in June last year overnight. The process will have to take time regardless of what you do to interest rates. And what happens if this latest increase and this situation with the commercial real estate causes more banks to fail? What happens if this causes many businesses to collapse? Will Jerome Powell and the rest of the clowns on the Open Market Committee sit in front of a jury and answer what data they used and what data they conveniently chose to not use, to ignore when making their interest rate decisions? Will they have to explain why no action at all was taken in 2021, why they all sat there giving all those completely idiotic speeches while inflation was skyrocketing for the first time in 50 years? Will there be any repercussions? Well, I am guessing that the answer is no. In fact, I am not guessing. I know the answer is no. And instead, they will get some fancy award from the government, a nice pension, retire, and charge a few $100,000 to give a speech at the Goldman Sachs annual leadership bash. And unfortunately, it is this complete lack of accountability that is causing this problem in the first place. The Fed has absolutely zero oversight, no second line of control. Whatever this committee decides gets no challenge other than half an hour of journalist questions at the press conference. And now that we're sleepwalking into a whole myriad of problems on the back of all of this shit that they're doing, it is all being created by the Fed's incompetence. I'm sure we're going to get speeches about how, nobody could have possibly predicted and the economy did this and the economy did that. But the Fed's continued incompetence means that they are not seeing the problems as they are arising or thinking about the potential ways that they can mitigate them. The commercial real estate problem is only one of a number of these issues, but after the last few weeks for the banking sector, it could well prove the straw that breaks the backs of regional banks. If you want to continue this conversation, discuss some of the finer details, feel free to join me in the Discord. I am in there all the time. You can sign up through Patreon in the description. It's just $5 a month. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And as always, I'll see you guys later.